Alright, yeah, so about a month ago I found out that I got a scholarship to go onto this China Start program, and I didn't really know too much about it. So I first found out about the program because as part of the Sydney School of Entrepreneurship, they get different lecturers to come in and talk about people that have been successful in business, in various aspects of business, to come and talk about their experiences. And so one of the people they got to come in was Bo G. And so I found out when I was on the program that actually Bo G is actually really good friends with Nick Kay, who's the CEO of the Sydney School of Entrepreneurship. So that's how that connection was made and how he came around here. And so he came here and spoke about, things that you need to be aware of when you're trying to enter into the Chinese market and trying to do business in China, and differences compared to doing business in the West versus the East. And it was a really good talk, it was really informative. And through the talk, he mentioned about this program that they have available, and a lot of it was like around going to visit all these different co-working spaces and businesses, and you get to pitch to them and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, well, I've done some of these things before. I've been through, I've been through an accelerator program, and I knew, some of the things about it and what was good and bad about these things. And so I was a bit skeptical. I was a bit on the fence. I wasn't quite sure what was going to be about, and I looked at the price of it. It was pretty expensive. So at the time, it was like £4,800 to apply for this program. So I was like, well, I can't justify spending that amount of money to go and do a program like this that may or may not be beneficial for me. We just don't, we're not in a position where we have that kind of cash. But then I spoke to one of the program coordinators, Lynn, who told me about the scholarship that Sydney School were offering. And so I looked into it a bit and was interested in applying, and I had some questions to her, but she didn't end up getting back to me for a while. And so I'd sort of just forgotten about it and thought, okay, well, this might not happen. That's fine, even though I was interested in going to China. And then she got back to me and told me, like, okay, answered the question and said, well, the scholarship is a full scholarship, and you'll be able to, they'll pay for the entire program cost. And all I'd have to do is pay for my flights and my accommodation while I was over there. And so I ended up applying for the scholarship and ended up getting it. And I had basically 3 weeks to sort of organize all my flights, all my accommodation, but then also figure out what I was going to do. Because I said, okay, I'm not going to just go there for these 5 days. I want to go to China. I'm going to extend my trip by a week and try to organize some other meetings and stuff while I'm over there. And so I had 3 weeks to sort out all the stuff, but also fill out all this documentation that I needed to fill out to get there, and apply for a visa, apply for my passport because my passport had expired. Like literally like the day that I got the actual scholarship. So it was pretty crazy. I didn't really have too much time to think about it, but I knew that I read a little bit about the Cheung Graduate School of Business, and so in the spreadsheet that they give us, they said, this is one of the most prestigious business schools in all of China. The alumni from the school account for 1/6 of China's GDP. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then so I didn't have too much time to think about it. And when I got there,
animation looks really good, so here we go.
thank you. I actually pulled that off the website and from Google. There we go. And then I didn't realise it was actually animated until I played the presentation. So this was like the 5-day program. It was completely packed. Like we were having lunch on the bus every day because there was just so much. There was just so packed full of activities. You had to. You had to pitch to all these different companies. Plus, on top of that, you had the opportunity to do company visits and also attend seminars that they would offer to their students that would go through their MBA and EMBA programs around doing business in China and just doing business in general. And through that process, you had to do your pitch, which was 1 or 3 minutes, depending on however much time you had left, or 30 seconds. And then he'd give you feedback on it, and he'd expect you to change your pitch, and then deliver that new pitch the next day. And that was in between you meeting all the different participants in the program and networking with them while you were traveling, and then meeting all these different people, and then meeting investors, and then trying to organize meetings with investors on WeChat, when you have to use Google Translate to translate between Mandarin and English. So it was pretty wild. So the day before the program started, they organised a dinner for us, and we got a chance to meet all the other participants in the program. And so I went in there blind. I had no idea what to expect or like the caliber of participants in the program. But then I started to talk to these entrepreneurs, and so like usually, so when I pitch, I tend to not practice when I give presentations. I don't like to have a script that I memorize and regurgitate. I prefer to do it ad lib, and so that's what I did. I didn't really have time to prepare a pitch for this, so I gave my slides, they translated into Mandarin, and I had both versions, and that was it, and I was like, okay, this should be okay. Then I got there that night, and we had dinner, and I got to meet some of these guys. And so one of the participants in the program, they were all incredibly amazing entrepreneurs from various different industries, like from AR, VR, blockchain, doing artificial intelligence, things like that. So I met some amazing people in the program that are based all over the world. Just to name a few, one of the guys, they developed this cube. It's basically like the soft little cube, and it's a toy for 8 to 10-year-olds that is actually an augmented reality cube. And so basically they have all these different applications you can get on your phone, and you can sort of emulate things like Minecraft on the cube and actually play around with it, which I actually have it here. It's in my bag. Get it out later and I can show you guys it. It's pretty cool. But that is like the most sold AR product that's on the market at the moment. And they're like one of the most sold. It's up there. And they've made millions of dollars in revenue. Most of these guys have. One of the guys is his company. They build submarines, and so they've built like 90-person submarines and private submarines. They also have a deal with Aston Martin where they're building private submarines for the uber wealthy. And he was there because he was pitching his new business, which was him and his team want to build an underwater hotel off the coast of Fiji. And so he was raising $40 million to do that. And there was another guy who had built 14 businesses and sold them. Well, not sold all of them, but he'd exited 4 of the 14 businesses, and I think like 8 of them are still going. And then 2 of them failed miserably. One of the failures the company was offered to be bought for $1 billion US, and all his business advisors at the time told him not to sell the company, and he should take it to IPO because that $1 billion will turn to 3 to 4. And over the process of doing that, the time that he ended up IPOing it was the day before September 11, and so that completely screwed his entire business. So he lost like $300 million in that process, but his last 2 companies that he exited, he made $500 million for all his investors, which is crazy. So there was just like this wealth of experience between all the participants in the program. It was inspiring, but it was also great to be around those type of entrepreneurs, and it was great to, I think for me, what I gained a lot out of it was, interacting. It's hard to talk about, explain this, but I found in Australia a lot of the time when you are doing business or you're dealing with people that have done business, they have a perception of what a successful business person looks like. Typically, they're a lot older than what I am, and so I find a lot of the time that people talk down to me and they think that, okay, you don't really know anything about business, or you can't know more than me about this area because you haven't made millions of dollars yet. Whereas it was really interesting when I was over there. People treated you a lot more differently, especially the people that were on the program. They were like, well, you are obviously, knowing my story and what we've done, they were like, what you've done is really great so far, but also at the same time, you being a part of this program is pretty special. And so they sort of treated you with that equality, that you were on the same level as them, and I was able to, some of the time, talking to them about things that I've implemented in my business, and they're like, oh, that's really interesting, I've never thought about doing that. I'd like, can you send me more information about that, this kind of stuff, which I thought that was really cool. And it was just really good to hear different people's ideas about how they do business, and actually having this network now of people that I can reach out to that are based all over the world, from like Russia, Europe, US. It's just amazing. Okay. So on the first day, so that's the other thing. So that night, we had this dinner, and then Bo gave us this talk afterwards and was telling us about, how much CKGSB actually value their alumni network. And so, because they have all these like, high net worth individuals, like, he was saying, like, the co-founder of Tencent, the co-founder of Foresight Investments, which is like the largest investment firm in China, And Tencent is the biggest company in the world. They do most of the games that you know. They've been partners with those organizations, or they've actually built them. And then also, yeah, and then Jack Ma is an alumni of the school. So they have this big, deep network of investors, but also high net worth individuals that he can reach out to. And so he was telling us about how they put all these resources together. One of the pitch events that we're going to be pitching to was actually co-organized by this guy who's like, he runs this TV show called, like, it's just like the Chinese version of Dragon's Den or something like that. And he said, look, tomorrow night, the first pitch event that you're going to be pitching at, we're going to be live streaming that to potentially 500,000 people. And throughout all these pitch events that you're going to be pitching at, there's going to be people that are imagining $20 to $30 billion funds that are like multi-millionaires or like multi-billionaires. So he's like, you better bring your A game. So this time I was like, shit, I should have probably prepared my pitch a bit more. So like the first day we had lectures, and so the whole time in between all of this, I'm just like trying to think, okay, what's my pitch? Like I've got to practice this pitch in my head. So I actually kind of get up and I know what I'm saying. And the pitch that we have now, the only times I've delivered that pitch was, when I've had almost unlimited time to pitch, but basically had like 5 to 5.5 minutes, 6 minutes to pitch. So I deleted a few of those slides, but probably not enough of them to bring it down to 3 minutes. So that's what I was worried about more than anything else, was how I was going to, succinctly say all that information in such a short amount of time. So in the first day we had 2 lectures. One was on Chinese cultural management, and so in that he talked about the differences between business in the East versus the West, and the different management styles that you have in China, but also things about from a cultural context, how that affects the way Chinese do businesses versus the way we would do business. And so for them, they're really big picture. They like to see things on a really higher level, and then they go down. So they're very context driven, and so that's the way they communicate, and that's the way they manage each other. And it's really interesting, because you'll see when you go to like, I don't know, anywhere where they have like numbers from 1 to 10, they'll always go 10 to 1 rather than going 1 to 10. And even, there's just all these little nuances in how they do things. And it's just really interesting when you start understanding this, it starts to make sense. So for them, they will sign a contract and then they will negotiate afterwards, because the negotiation, that's all in the details, whereas the contract, if overall it makes sense, then they're happy to sign it and they're like, okay, we're going to do business together. And a lot of them, they really value relationships when they do business with you. So one of the guys that I met on the program was telling me, because he's been doing business in China since like the 80s. And so he was saying something someone told him when he first started going to China to do business, was that, People's Republic of China, that's not what PRC stands for. It actually stands for patience, relationship, and cash. It's like, if you have all those 3 things, then you'll be able to be successful in doing business in China. And then after that, he gave us a pitching workshop, which I was like, I've done heaps of these pitching workshops before. This should be pretty straightforward stuff. But it was interesting because he did talk about some of the things that you need to focus on in terms of pitching to investors, and what your objectives are if you're doing a 1 minute, 30-second or 3-minute pitch, because a lot of the time, I think a lot of entrepreneurs always think, okay, well, I didn't tell you every single detail about my business, because otherwise you're not going to be interested in talking to me. But the thing is, he was saying, is that if you do that, then you leave them no room to ask you questions, and you leave them no room to develop that relationship further and continue that conversation with you. So your goal should always be either they're going to ask you more questions at the end of it, or they're going to come up to you to set up a meeting so that they can get more information about your business, and then you can take it to the next stages. Because with Chinese, they want to develop that relationship with you, and then they'll want to do business with you afterwards, which is a little bit different to sort of, I guess, we are relationship driven, but it's in a different way to how it's done in China. And then so after that, we got a chance to visit JD.com, which is basically like the Amazon of China. And it's just crazy. One of the things that, and as you'll see throughout all of these pictures that I'm going to show you, is that how much money there is in China, and how much money they just spend on just doing things. I don't know why the video's not playing, but
analogy is great when it works.
Yeah, but like they'll just spend heaps of money on just like showcasing like the buildings in this area that are all part of JD.com's headquarters, and it's weird because they have like this like, you know, this corporate headquarters, but then it's mixed with like this delivery center, and then there's like stores all around it, which is just really interesting. And then they also have like a showroom where they showcase all the technology they have developed or that they're looking to develop. So obviously for them, logistics is a big part of it. So they've developed like, you know, petrol drones, smaller size drones, fixed wing planes, and even delivery vehicles and stuff to move around things in warehouses as well, which is really interesting. And then this was really cool, is they had this giant screen that went across four like the walls and also the ceiling and the floor. And they just had this massive video that was just showcasing what they do. And that it's just what they have in their headquarters. All these businesses have crazy things like this, where they just spend ludicrous amounts of money on things that you think don't matter. But it's also really cool at the same time to go and see it all. And then, so this night was the pitch event that we had. And so at the time, I got a recording for most of my pitches, and I didn't watch it till afterwards, but I remember this one, I was like, oh, I didn't think I did a very good job of the pitch, because I went over time, and usually I'm pretty good with my understanding my time when I do pitches, but then afterwards, I watched the video again. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was, which is always a good thing to know. But what was really interesting is they have, you know, everyone uses WeChat there, which I think is really cool, because what you can do is when you go to these events, you have your QR code on your final slide, and then you don't have to worry about going and exchanging business cards with people afterwards. They add you on WeChat because they scan your QR code, and then you just have a direct IM that you can communicate with these investors, with people that are interested in your business. Then you can send them information. So what they got us to do was we had to prepare a WeChat article before we went on the program. And so basically that was just like all these questions about our businesses and, you know, information that we could give them so that they know a little bit more about our business, or it's basically summarizing what would be in our pitch. And what they did was they translated it into Mandarin for us, and so basically they told us this is the message that you have to send them as soon as they add you on WeChat, and then you send them your WeChat article, and then you can start organizing meetings with them after that. So I had like, by the end of all the events, like more than 100 people on WeChat that had added me that I engaged with through the process, which is really great. And I think that was one of the main benefits of going on a program like this, was that the amount of engagement I had with investors or other business people in the space, to have that engagement in Australia would have taken me 12 months, and I probably wouldn't have even, I would have struggled to have gotten that amount of engagement with investors in that time. So through that process, I learned a lot about the process of engaging with investors, but also the other thing that I sort of realized towards the end was that it's so easy to just assume that just because someone has more money than you, that they know more about business than you do, and if they question something that you're doing, you're like, well, oh, maybe I'm doing something wrong. But actually, sometimes they just don't understand certain aspects of your business, and so even if they're really strong about saying that something you're doing is wrong, you have to be like, you have to actually flesh that information out of them. So they could be right, but you need to question them and dig deeper to find out why they think that thing that they think, and realize afterwards. So an example of that was one of the investors that I met with and I had a phone conversation and then met with following afterwards in my second week. She didn't really understand the core benefits of the technology we were developing. And so she was sort of just like trivializing all these really complicated, intricate engineering concepts about, like, you know, tracking multiple objects, or also identifying objects and avoiding them. And I had to sort of ask her and be like, well, she's like, oh, it's already been done before, it's really easy to do, we have all these people doing it. I'm like, okay, hang on a second. Are they doing this in indoor environments or outdoor environments? She's like, oh, well, it's in indoor environments. I'm like, okay. And are those objects, they know where those objects are before anything, before the robot moves around that environment? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's easy. You can use timers to do that. You don't need to be able to sense anything to do that. That's really simple, but this is where our technology is different. And I had to sort of go through that process with her, and by the end of it, she understood what we were doing and the core benefits of our technology, and she understood that a lot better. But it's just, yeah, it was just interesting having to go through that process of being able to engage with all these different investors. I sort of understand a bit better how to go through that how to actually have those conversations with investors, but also have the confidence to question them when they're wrong, which I think is really interesting because I think a lot of the time, a lot of these people, they're so busy, they're sort of, they're directors, they're straight to the point, and that can be mistaken. And because they're in a position of authority, it's really easy to get, bulldozed by their questioning or their thought process. And so, anyway, after this event, I got interviewed by this media agency in China, and that was really interesting because there's obviously most of these people don't speak English, they all speak Mandarin, especially in Beijing. And so I had a translator there that was translating what I was saying, and she was asking these really in-depth questions about, where I think robotics is going in the future, and like limitations of robotics, and explaining like intricacies in what we're doing. And it was challenging to translate, to explain that in a way that was simple enough so that she could understand it, especially because she didn't have the right background. But that was like probably one of the longest interviews I've ever had for a year. It literally went on. She had like 15 questions, and it went on for like more than an hour. By the end of it, I was like, I'm so hungry and so tired right now. And so I got out, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go eat some food that we had there. And Bo was like, okay, guys, don't eat too much because one of my really good friends, I tried to tell him that we can't go out to dinner, but he's insisted that we go out to his restaurant. He owns this really high-end restaurant in Beijing, and he's really, really, really powerful and successful. He's actually was the #1 futures trader in China, and he's made billions and billions of dollars in the stock market. And so now he just owns a bunch of these restaurants. So we're just gonna go there for dinner, and he's insisted for us to go there. So we're gonna go eat at his restaurant, which is where this picture's from. And so that actually there is turtle. It's turtle curry.
Wow.
And yeah, so it was just crazy, and he you can't actually see the picture because it's kind of cropped out, but he had photos of all of us up there, and he had this book that had photos of him and Bo, and so it was just really interesting because he put that all together in about an hour after he told Bo that you got to come here, you got to come out for dinner and bring everyone here. But it was really interesting because when he gave a presentation, and so did Bo, and you could really tell how powerful relationships are in Chinese business, because they really, you could see how well connected they were, even though they probably don't see each other that much because they're such busy business people. And yet he went out of his way to make sure that he organized this event and invited us all over and paid for our dinners, and there's 30 of us that were there. It was crazy. So on the second day, we had more lectures. So this guy is, his last name is B. I can't remember what his first name was. But he is the founding dean of the university, but he also sits on the board of 2 Fortune 500 companies. And so he's done a lot of business in the West and also the East. And so he talked to us about, from a cultural context, how people in China do business, and he talked about changes that have happened over the past decades and centuries in China, and how that affects the way they think about business, the way they think about things. And what I found, something that he said that I found really interesting when I was engaging with investors afterwards, is because Chinese civilization has been around for so long, they think about business in a different way, because they think about things in a more longer term, and they have to, because especially their population increased from 100 million to 1.4 billion in the space of 1,000 years. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount of growth, and so for them, they have to think of things in a more long term. And you were talking about this with me, Gary, about how they're talking about their energy consumption and how they need to look for more renewable forms of energy, because they're going to run out of. They're not going to be able to supply the amount of coal power that they need in the next 20 years, so they have to look for alternative means for doing that. And that's the way they think. And so for them, short-term thinking is 2, 5, 10 years. And long-term thinking is 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years, And it really changes the way they think, especially when you're talking to them about investment proposals, because they ask you completely different questions. So here in Australia, when I engage with investors, they're like, okay, how much money are you making? What's your projected earnings going to be over the next few years? Are you going to hit break even in 12 months? Oh, you're not. Sorry, I don't want to talk to you. Whereas there, they want to know about the technology. They want to understand the technology, and then they want to talk about the money afterwards, because they want to see where's the value of this technology and where's this industry going as it moves forward. So I actually watched a documentary as I was going over there about Shenzhen, and they were talking about how all these manufacturers have made so much money in China, so now they're bringing that back into the innovation ecosystem, and how they sort of want to, and how they want to promote this, promote innovation a lot more. And so for them, like someone was just like, yeah, I want to build a flying car, that, you know, with have like a drone that can carry one person, like a one-person passenger drone. Let's go and do it. And obviously there's more to it than that, but they'll put in money to fund those kind of projects. But also that's partly because they have a lot of money. But one of the other things that he mentioned that was really interesting, and the whole time I was hearing people talking about doing business over there, is that you forget how small Australia is in a global context, and our market is just so inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. So, for example, one of the things that he mentioned was that in China, the Communist Party in China have 90 million members. That's like that's more than 4 times, that's almost 4 times our entire country's population. And that's just their government organization. It's just so crazy when you think about that, because when you spend so much time in Australia, you kind of forget how, because we're so geographically isolated from the rest of the world, you kind of forget how insignificant our population is compared to the rest of the world. And it really affects, what I found was the way, it affects the way we think about business and the way we think about money, because from here, because we're so separated, it's a lot more effort for us to go and access these markets, because it's further for us to travel. We think about things in a lot more of a scarcity sort of mindset, because there's less people available, there's less market potential available here, whereas globally and even in China, that's not the issue at all. So when I was having meetings with investors and things like that, for them, money wasn't an issue. They were like, well, we don't care, like, the money's fine, we can talk about that later. What we want to talk about is, how can we take your technology and bring it into this country? What markets can we address this technology with? Because for them, they're like, you could easily find the amount of money that you want to raise here. It's not that hard for you to do. Obviously, there's other aspects to it, and there's more implications involved than just giving you cash. But it's just really interesting understanding that and getting that perspective from going over there. And then this is actually a perfect example of that. So we went to go visit this autonomous county area, and they basically built this entire building to promote this region, and it would have cost them millions and millions of dollars to do. And they had like this really massive like interactive map thing and this big screen that was coming up, and they had all these other cool things in this building, and it would have cost them so much money to put it together. But that's just sort of the way they spend money, which is just really interesting. And then we also went to the movie world that was there on the second day, and then we had a chance to pitch at Tech Code. I just realised that I've spent so long talking that I need to go through this a bit quicker. And then on day 3, we got the opportunity to pitch to 4-star investments. So one of the things that was really cool about the program is because of their strong alumni network and the way, and because these guys were alumni of the school, we had doors open to us that most other foreigners wouldn't usually have open in terms of being able to pitch to, you know, big investment firms. So at the bottom of the screen here, like last year, they made 88 billion RMB. So the exchange rate's like one Australian dollar to 5.323 RMB, which is just crazy. So it's like 2.6 billion dollars or something like that, and they had $530 billion in assets. That was what was recorded on their books last year. But it was really great having the opportunity to pitch to such big investment firms, and then I ended up having follow-up meetings with them afterwards, and we'll be looking to have more meetings with them as we progress. But I've been in contact with some of the people in their team, which is pretty exciting. And then we had another pitch event that was also co-organised at Tech 365. And so they were able to bring all these different investors into all these different events, which was really, really good. So one of the ladies I spoke to, actually, that was something that I found really surprising, was that all these events, I think in Australia they talk a lot about, especially you find that there's a big issue with gender diversity in entrepreneurship and innovation space. But there, I probably had more meetings with females than I had the entire time I've been doing my business in Australia. Like, it was crazy because I'm not sure if you can see it very clearly from here, but there were heaps of females that were either VCs or working at VC funds, and there wasn't as much. Obviously, there is an issue with gender diversity everywhere, but it was less prominent in China than what I found from those events that I went to than what we actually have here, which I thought that was pretty crazy. And it was surprising. And then day 4 we went to Shenzhen. And so we actually got taught a lecture on internet marketing in China. And this was really interesting because I learned a lot about how, and this is something that was mentioned in Bing's lecture where he was talking about a lot of the conceptions we have about what Chinese are like doing business is actually hangovers from what had happened in like the 80s and 90s. And doing business there has changed so much in that time. They've grown so quickly. So someone was telling me that if you go to a Chinese person and you talk to them about Nintendo and Game Boys, they don't know what that is because they kind of just skipped that entire decade, which is really interesting. And so this was really powerful to me because it made me sort of think about how they've sort of adopted similar technologies that we have here in Australia, or in our part of the world, especially with the prominence of WeChat and how significant it is in their day-to-day lives. So one of the things that was really interesting was that you can use WeChat to pay for everything there, and they use WeChat to pay for things. So you'll go to, like, this is a restaurant that I went to, and on the side you'll see there's like QR codes on either side of the table. And basically you sit down, you look at the menu and you say, okay, this is what I want. On your phone, you order it, you pay for it, they already know what table number it is, they prepare it for you and they bring it out. And it's just so simple, and it's such an easy system to use. And this is a really good example that exemplifies that, because you'll have QR codes not only on like things that you would normally think about paying for, but you'll go to like dodgy little corner stores that are on the side of the road, and they'll have a QR code hanging there, and so you just scan your QR code, you pay for the thing, and show them that you paid for it, and then you just take the thing and you walk away. It's great, and they said even this guy here is like a beggar, so he's got a phone with the QR code on it, so you can't just be like, I have no money. But then part of that also is that there's also this huge disparity in wealth. So you have like really, really wealthy parts of China, and right next to it there'll be slums. And I saw that where there was just massive high-rise buildings, and in front of that there were these really decrepit, dilapidated buildings, just right next door to these massive buildings. But then the other thing as well was about how they focus on using technology and promoting participation. So one of the things that we learned about was that they're very community focused, and so when you have dinner in China, a lot of the time, if you saw the picture of that night that we went out for dinner, there was a table and the food is all sitting on this round glass platter, and so you move everything, you're sitting around in a circle, and so you're always facing everyone at the table, and you can have an equal opportunity to talk to everyone, and then you're sharing food, and it's very communal. And it's the same way as how they use the internet. So they value creating these communities and interacting with each other, and I actually got rid of that picture on the slide, but they have this platform that they use where you can actually watch videos, and you can actually write comments and post it on the video at the same time, and it overlays it on the screen. Which is really interesting, but they also started integrating that into board meetings and things like that, where the CEO will be talking, and then they'll have people being able to the opportunity to provide feedback and talk about these things. And that was something that they mentioned the example of what Nike did. So Nike was struggling to get traction in China, and what they found was, because once they realized this, they started creating these opportunities. They created a community and a participation around their products, around doing marathons and having an active lifestyle. And so now you'll find that people and because they were able to do that, they were able to increase their profits and the money that they were making in China by a lot. And they've just created this thing where now cities will people will go on waiting lists to enter marathons. They'll be paying money to enter marathons, like a lot of money, just to be able to enter marathons, because Nike have created such a strong brand around that part, entering races and having an active lifestyle. which is just really interesting. And then after that, we also got to visit Tencent headquarters, which is just like another crazy cool building. So it reminds me so much of Google. So I think they're worth something like 390 billion US dollars. They're like the biggest company in the world or something like that. But yeah, they just have like, massive basketball courts and like 3-story rock climbing walls all around this. And then after that, we got to go to their innovation hub and do our final business pitch. Yeah. And then the next day, we got to visit Freenode. So this guy, Richard, he's crazy. He's probably one of the craziest people I've ever met. I'll have to tell you about one of the stories that he told us of how he got to where he was. But basically, he owns like 40% of Monster China, and he's just, all about like execution and. And so basically, they do all the hardware electronics manufacturing for Lenovo and Sonos. And so he runs this industrial design agency, and this picture here, there's actually a picture of this fridge, and it's a transparent fridge, and so you can see what's inside it, but also it's like, it's linked to the cloud, so it knows your buying behavior, it knows what you buy, and as soon as something runs low, it recognizes that it's not there, and it automatically orders it for you. And the crazy thing about in China is that the on-demand delivery services are so big, so you can get, if you want cut watermelon or like food delivered to your door, you'll be able to get that delivered to your door at like midnight. And they were saying to us that, if you go to a restaurant and they don't have the alcohol that you like, you can get alcohol that you actually want delivered to the restaurant. Which is just crazy. And that adoption of technology is very different to what we have here. So, and a lot of that's influenced by the way the government is. So for us, we have this big thing about, data privacy protection, whereas they're already sort of used to not having, that privacy. But then you can see the benefits of, some of the benefits of that is that you have this really, easy to use technology that's adopted on a massive scale very quickly, which I found really interesting. And then from there, we had another lecture on business modeling, and then also we had to present our Go to China strategy. So they organized a panel of people from accelerator spaces to government officials, and we presented our Go to China strategy, and they provided us feedback. They provided us with feedback on that and things that we can do, and gave us advice on how we could actually implement these strategies to take our business into China. It was really great. Yeah, and then we sort of ended the program, and after that I had to madly book flights in between organising all these crazy meetings and go back to all these different places to meet everyone. And it was really weird, I had to put this in here. So one of the ladies that I organised a meeting with was one of the reporters that interviewed me, and she's like, okay, why don't we meet at the Starbucks at the place? I was like, what the hell? What is the place? So it turns out there's actually this somewhere in Beijing called the place, and that's where it was. But I think it was just like a lot of really bad translations. But it's just funny because it's actually like this big sign that they've got there and says the place in English. But yeah, so that's pretty much, there's so many more stories that I could tell, but I realized that I spoke for too long already. So yeah. Do you guys have any questions?